I want you to close your eyes for a second. Just,
Yeah.
just imagine a very specific, um, a really incredibly intrusive scenario. You are sitting in your living room. You're trying to read a book or, I don't know, watch television. And your house's fire alarm is blaring.
Yeah, and not a quiet one.
Right, exactly. I don't mean a distant, muffled beep from down the hall. I mean it is absolutely deafening. It's that piercing, synthetic, high-pitched shriek that, it almost seems to vibrate the fluid right behind your eyes.
Oh, that's the absolute worst.
It really is. It's the kind of noise that makes your jaw clench involuntarily.
Well, because it's the kind of acoustic assault that completely hijacks your autonomic nervous system. I mean, your heart rate immediately spikes, your pupils dilate, your muscles brace for an impact. You can't think clearly. We certainly can't focus on a nuanced conversation.
No, not at all.
And sleep is, absolutely out of the question. Your entire biological imperative just narrows down to a single objective, finding the source of the danger and neutralizing it.
Right. So you do the logical thing. You do what anyone in a functional society would do. You pick up your phone, and you call the fire department.
Naturally.
You wait on the curb, the flashing red lights pull up, the firefighters step out, they walk through your front door, and they look around your living room, they check the kitchen, they look at the ceiling,
Right.
and then they turn to you and they roll their eyes.
Wow.
They tell you there's no smoke, they inform you there are no flames, there's no heat signature, no structural damage, and then the captain looks you dead in the eye and accuses you of making the noise up.
Which is it's infuriating. They might tell you it's an attention-seeking behavior. They might suggest you're simply overwhelmed by work and, I don't know, maybe you just need a vacation.
Right. Take a few days off.
Exactly. So they pack up their gear, they walk out the door, and they leave you standing in the hallway.
But the alarm never stops. You wake up to that piercing shriek. You commute to work with it. You try to sit at the dinner table and listen to your kids talk about their day while it screams relentlessly in the background.
Yeah.
And if you try to complain about it again, your friends and family start giving you that look. You know the look, the pitying, exhausted look.
Yeah.
Because this isn't a metaphor for having a bad week. It's not just generalized anxiety. This is the literal, waking, daily reality for millions of human beings living with chronic pain.
It is, and it creates a profound, incredibly isolating exhaustion that is honestly very difficult for healthy individuals to comprehend.
It really is.
Because the patient is fundamentally fighting a two-front war. On one side, they're battling the relentless alarm itself, the physical, neurological sensation of agony. And simultaneously, they're battling a world, a medical system, and often a family that demands they constantly prove the alarm even exists.
Which is just exhausting.
Yeah.
So today, we are taking on the role of the strategic patient and the veteran physician to break down how to fight and ultimately survive that exact two-front war. We have a massive stack of source material sitting in front of us for this deep dive.
Oh, it's a mountain of data.
It really is. We're looking at clinical psychiatry reviews. We've got highly detailed therapist manuals developed by the VA, systematic umbrella reviews of psychiatric data covering literally millions of patient records, and some incredibly practical patient advocacy guides.
The good stuff.
Exactly. So the mission of this deep dive, our absolute goal over the next hour, is to bridge the immense communication gap surrounding chronic pain.
Because that communication gap isn't just an inconvenience, It is a source of staggering, unnecessary suffering. We really need to dismantle this concept of biological gaslighting.
Yes, absolutely.
We are going to break down the actual cellular reality of why your pain is valid, even if an MRI doesn't show a torn ligament. We are going to untangle the incredibly complex bidirectional web between chronic physical pain and mental health.
Which is huge.
It is. And we're also going to look at the deeply counterintuitive science of pacing, which, frankly, demands a complete rewiring of how you structure your daily life.
And most importantly, we are going to equip you with the exact vocabulary the literal word-for-word scripts that you need to advocate for yourself. We are going to shift the mindset from acting like a defendant apologizing for your broken body to acting like a project manager establishing your operating constraints.
I love that framework.
Me too. But to even get to that point of advocacy, we have to completely dismantle the all-in-your-head myth, right? We have to understand the biology of validation. If we want to understand the alarm, we need to know how the wiring actually works.
Absolutely.
Let's start at the absolute foundation. What is the fundamental biological difference between the pain of, say, touching a hot stove or spraining an ankle and chronic pain?
Well, if we look under the hood of human evolution, acute pain, so that sprained ankle, or touching the hot stove, It serves a very specific, highly refined evolutionary purpose.
Keeps us alive.
Exactly. It is a protective warning signal. Let's look at the actual mechanism. When you touch a hot stove, specialized nerve endings in your skin, they're called nociceptors, detect the extreme thermal change.
Okay. Nociceptors.
Right. They fire an electrical signal that races up your peripheral nerves right into your spinal cord and up to your brain. The brain processes this instantly and outputs the sensation of pain, which forces you to jerk your hand away before the tissue literally incinerates.
So it's the fire alarm working exactly as designed. There is a literal fire. The thermal sensors detect the heat. The alarm goes off. You remove your hand, the tissue is saved. And once the mild burn heals, the alarm just shuts off.
Precisely. It is a symptom of an underlying, temporary, localized injury. Chronic pain, however, operates on an entirely different paradigm.
Oh, so.
Well, clinically, it's defined as pain persisting or recurring for more than 3 months. But, and this is key, the duration isn't the most important part. The mechanism is. Chronic pain contains almost zero evolutionary benefit.
Wow, really? None.
Practically none. In most cases, the initial tissue damage, the sprained back, the surgical incision, the infection, it has completely healed. Or in some really devastating conditions, there was no initial tissue damage to begin with.
Which is so frustrating for patients.
It is, and the medical literature we are reviewing highlights this monumental paradigm shift that has taken place in neurology over the last 2 decades. Chronic pain is not merely a symptom of something else. It is a disease in itself.
Okay, let's just linger on that for a second. Because as a patient, hearing that phrase, a disease in itself, feels incredibly validating.
I'm sure it does.
It shifts the entire expectation. We spend so much time running from specialist to specialist, literally begging them to find the hidden torn cartilage or the secret pinched nerve so they can perform a surgery and cure us.
Right. Looking for a mechanical fix.
Exactly. Acknowledging that the pain is the disease means we are no longer looking for a hidden injury. We are managing a chronic neurobiological condition.
Exactly. The nervous system's hardware has fundamentally changed. The literature refers to this phenomenon as nociplastic pain, which stems from a process called central sensitization.
Central sensitization. Break that down for us. What actually happens at the cellular level?
Well, when a patient experiences prolonged severe pain or profound trauma, the nervous system doesn't just passively transmit those signals, it adapts. It undergoes neuroplasticity.
Like learning a new skill.
Yes, but in this case, it's maladaptive neuroplasticity. The neurons in the spinal cord and the brain actually grow new receptors, specifically NMDA receptors, and these make them far more efficient at catching pain signals.
Wait, so the nerves are literally mutating to become better at feeling agony.
That is exactly what's happening. Furthermore, the threshold for what triggers those nerves just plummets. Ion channels stay open longer. Support cells in the nervous system, they're called glial cells, start releasing pro-inflammatory cytokines.
Okay, so they're bathing the nerves in this chemical soup.
A highly excitatory chemical soup. The entire system becomes hypervigilant. It becomes so oversensitized that it starts interpreting completely harmless stimuli like light pressure, a mild temperature change, emotional stress as severe tissue-damaging pain.
So the alarm system sensors have essentially been calibrated to detect a speck of dust, and then they trigger the massive building-wide sprinkler system.
That's a great way to picture it.
One of the physiotherapy guys in our stack had this brilliant, just incredibly relatable analogy for how the brain processes these signals. Imagine your brain is a parent, and it is constantly refereeing a house full of energetic, arguing children.
Oh, I like this one.
Right. The children represent the millions of subconscious sensory signals your body sends up the spinal cord every single second of the day. Like the air conditioning is cold, my socks are too tight, I just bumped my elbow, my stomach is digesting lunch.
And the brain's amygdala and prefrontal cortex have to process all of those competing signals instantaneously. They have to evaluate the context and decide whether to output a pain response to protect the body.
Right, because pain is a decision.
Exactly. Pain is an output. It is a decision made by the brain based on perceived danger. In a healthy nervous system, the parent ignores the tight socks and the digestion and only intervenes when a child actually falls off a chair.
But in a nervous system suffering from central sensitization, that parent is utterly exhausted. They are sleep-deprived, deeply traumatized, and overwhelmed. Their baseline stress level is at a 10.
Right. They are on edge.
So a child walking up and softly tapping them on the shoulder to ask a question results in the parent absolutely jumping out of their skin and screaming. The tactile input was harmless, a soft tap, but the output was a massive disproportionate reaction. because the danger threshold of the parent had plummeted.
This physiological reality perfectly aligns with a framework proposed back in 2002 by researchers Turk and Monarch, and it remains totally foundational in pain psychology today. They drew a hard line between the concepts of disease and illness.
Okay, let's break that down, because those words are just used interchangeably in casual conversation all the time, but medically they are entirely different beasts.
Very different. The disease is the distinct biological event. It is the altered nerve pathways, the proliferation of those NMDA receptors, the central sensitization we just discussed. It is objective, measurable biological dysfunction.
Okay. And the illness.
The illness, however, is the subjective experience and the human response to that disease. It's how the pain impacts your ability to hold the job, your sleep architecture, your mood, your relationships, your sense of self-worth.
So the disease is the frayed electrical wire in the wall. The illness is the fact that my house is currently burning down, my family is terrified, and I don't have a place to sleep tonight.
That captures it perfectly, because chronic pain, at least in its current medical understanding, typically cannot be cured in the traditional sense. It must be viewed and managed as an illness through a biopsychosocial lens.
Biopsychosocial, that's a mouthful.
It is, but it just means biology, psychology, and social factors all combined. You could theoretically have two patients with the exact same objective biological nerve damage, the exact same disease, but their psychosocial factors will completely dictate their illness.
Give me an example of that.
Well, a patient with a highly supportive spouse, immense financial security, and a great therapist will experience a fundamentally different illness than a patient with the exact same nerve damage who is facing eviction, isolation, and severe depression.
Okay, now I need to pause here for a second. Because as we talk about the brain making decisions about pain outputs and the impact of psychosocial factors, I have to push back a little bit.
Go for it.
I am raising the red flag on behalf of every listener who has ever sat on a crinkly paper exam table and felt belittled. If we acknowledge that all pain is technically an output generated in the brain, if we use analogies about a hyper-reactive parent making a decision, aren't we accidentally handing live ammunition to those skeptical, dismissive doctors?
I see where you're going with this.
Right. Aren't we validating the specialists who cross their arms, look at a clean MRI, and tell the patient, well, the scan is clear, so this is clearly psychological. It's all in your head.
That is the most critical juncture in chronic pain advocacy, and we really need to be incredibly precise with our language here to dismantle what we can accurately call biological gaslighting. There is a massive fundamental scientific difference between a sensation being generated by the brain and a sensation being imaginary.
Yes. I always think about vision when this comes up. Literally everything we experience is generated by the brain. If I stand in a park and look at an oak tree, the oak tree is not physically inside my skull.
Right.
The photons of light bounce off the bark, hit my retina, travel down the optic nerve, and my brain's visual cortex generates the image of the tree. My brain decides what I see. But if I tell a doctor I'm looking at a tree, they don't patronize me and say, well, the tree is just an output of your visual cortex, so it's imaginary. It's all in your head.
Your visual analogy is scientifically spot on. Imaginary pain does not exist. The sensation of pain is as real as the sensation of sight or sound. The trauma of medical skepticism that chronic pain patients endure is profound. When a patient summons the immense courage and energy to seek help and they are faced with doubt, when they are subtly accused of malingering, exaggerating, or drug-seeking, it causes immense psychological distress.
It breaks people.
It does. But the tragedy of biological gaslighting isn't just that it hurts the patient's feelings, it is a physiological disaster for the chronic pain condition itself.
Because it triggers the body's ultimate defense mechanism, the fight or flight response.
Precisely. When a patient feels they are not believed by an authority figure, especially one who holds the keys to their relief, their body interprets that interaction as a profound threat to their survival.
The alarm bells go off again.
The amygdala sounds the alarm, the sympathetic nervous system engages, the adrenal glands dump cortisol and adrenaline right into the bloodstream. Blood vessels constrict and muscles tense up, bracing for a physical attack.
The body perceives a tiger in the exam room. Not a literal tiger, but a social, existential threat to their safety.
And because the patient is constantly fighting this battle for belief, with doctors, with insurance companies, with skeptical family members, their body remains in a state of chronic sympathetic arousal.
They never get to relax.
Never. It never gets the chance to downregulate and recuperate. That severe, constant muscle tension physically pulls on already sensitive joints and nerves. The cortisol creates systemic inflammation, which directly amplifies the nociplastic pain signals. The gaslighting literally makes the biological disease worse.
Which means the inverse must also be true, right? Validation is not just a nice, polite bedside manner. It's not just good customer service. Validation is an active, measurable biological intervention.
The clinical literature strongly emphasizes this. When a patient sits across from a healthcare provider and that provider looks them in the eye and says, "I believe you, your pain is real, even if our current imaging technology isn't sophisticated enough to show it," a physiological shift occurs.
You can almost feel the relief.
The patient's defensive walls drop. The sympathetic nervous system dials down. The flood of stress hormones recedes, allowing the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest network, to finally engage. Validation literally alters the chemical environment of the patient's nervous system. It provides a stable baseline from which real pain management can begin.
That blows my mind. A doctor using their words to provide validation acts as a systemic anti-inflammatory. It physically turns down the volume of the hypersensitized nervous system.
It really is medical treatment in itself.
But acknowledging this deep biological reality that the brain and the nervous system are ground zero for chronic pain, and that stress directly fuels the fire, naturally forces us to look at the secondary casualty of this invisible disease. We have to look at the blast radius. And that brings us to the mind itself.
You really cannot build a firewall between the physical hardware of the nervous system and the software of our mental health. They are running on the exact same neurological circuitry, using the exact same neurotransmitters.
The data on this overlap is where the reality of the illness becomes staggering. We're looking at an incredibly comprehensive umbrella review published in European Psychiatry.
A huge piece of literature.
Massive. And for context for the listener, an umbrella review isn't just a single study of 50 people. It is a systematic review of other systematic reviews. It is the highest level of epidemiological evidence we have. This specific review looked at nearly 1 million people diagnosed with mental disorders, compared against over 16 million control subjects.
Which is just a breathtaking sample size.
Yeah. The objective was to definitively synthesize the prevalence, the risk factors, and the overlap between chronic pain and psychiatric conditions.
The sheer scale of the data demands our attention. And what they found validates what chronic pain patients have been whispering in support groups for decades. The coexistence of mental illness and chronic pain is not a coincidence, it is not a weakness, and it is deeply intertwined.
So what were the numbers? Let's look at the specific prevalence rates.
Let's take post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The data shows the prevalence of chronic pain in individuals with PTSD is reported to be as high as 96%.
Wait, 96%?
Yes,
I
96%.
want you, the listener, to really absorb that number. If you have survived trauma severe enough to cause PTSD, it is a statistical anomaly if you do not live with chronic pain. You are the exception to the rule.
Exactly.
And the data highlighted specific types of physical manifestations, right? Stomach pain, severe chest pain, chronic lower back pain. It is the literal embodiment of the phrase, "the body keeps the score." The nervous system is so trapped in fight or flight from the trauma that the pain threshold is permanently lowered.
The trauma essentially primes the pump for central sensitization. Then we look at major depressive disorder, MDDA. The overlap there is massive, sitting between 53% and 65%.
Over half.
Easily over half. Bipolar disorder shows a 23.7% prevalence of chronic pain, which is exponentially higher than the general population. And we really cannot ignore the economic devastation of this dual diagnosis.
It's the financial toxicity.
Exactly. The review noted that chronic pain in individuals suffering from depression and anxiety incurs an additional $5,208 annually per patient.
And where's that money going? It's going to emergency room visits in the middle of the night because the pain has triggered a panic attack, it's lost productivity, it's missed shifts at work, and it's the desperate out-of-pocket spending on alternative treatments trying to find a fix when the traditional system fails them.
The financial toxicity of chronic pain really is a disease in itself. But what is truly fascinating within the European Psychiatry Review is the methodology they use to prove the bidirectional nature of this relationship. They utilize something called Mendelian randomization studies.
Okay, stop right there. Mendelian randomization sounds like something out of a graduate genetics textbook. What does that actually mean, and why does it matter to someone sitting at home with a heating pad on their back?
It matters immensely because it proves causation, not just correlation.
Okay, causation.
Right. In typical observational studies, if we see that people with back pain also have depression, skeptics can say, well, maybe they are just depressed because they eat poorly or they don't exercise. Mendelian randomization uses known genetic variants as a proxy to establish a direct causal pathway. It eliminates the background noise.
That's brilliant.
And what these genetic studies proved is that living with multi-site chronic pain actively biologically causes an increased risk of developing major depressive disorder.
Which makes intuitive sense. If you are subjected to relentless, inescapable physical torture day after day, it will inevitably grind down your emotional reserves and deplete your brain's serotonin.
But the Mendelian randomization proved the inverse is also true. Having major depressive disorder significantly increases the biological risk of developing chronic regional pain. The depression isn't just an emotional state, it physically alters the neurobiology.
Let's explain the biology of that. If I have depression, why does my knee hurt more? I've heard the analogy that negative affect like severe anxiety or depression acts like a volume knob on the stereo of your physical pain.
Yeah.
But what is actually turning that knob?
To understand the volume knob, we have to look at the brain's descending pain modulatory system.
Descending pain modulatory system.
Okay. Normally, your brain sends signals down the spinal cord to inhibit or break incoming pain signals. It's a built-in shock absorber. This braking system relies heavily on neurotransmitters like serotonin and norepinephrine, as well as endogenous opioids, your body's natural painkillers.
Right, the stuff that makes you feel good.
Exactly. When a patient suffers from major depressive disorder, the production and availability of those specific neurotransmitters are severely depleted.
So depression literally removes the brake pads from the nervous system.
Exactly. The nociceptive signals from the knee arrive at the spinal cord, and because the depression has depleted the serotonin and endogenous opioids, there is nothing there to inhibit the signal. The gate is left wide open. The volume knob is cranked to maximum. The disease of depression physically amplifies the disease of chronic pain.
This feedback loop is just terrifying. And a massive accelerator of that loop, which the VA Therapist Manual dedicates entire chapters to, is a specific cognitive process called catastrophizing.
It's a loaded word.
It really is. Now, as a patient advocate, I hate that word. It sounds so dismissive. If a doctor writes catastrophizing in my chart, it feels like they're calling me a dramatic, hysterical hypochondriac.
Right.
But clinically, the manual defines it not as a character flaw, but as a very specific three-part psychological mechanism.
It is crucial to destigmatize the term. Catastrophizing is not a moral failing or an intentional exaggeration. It is a psychological trap that the human brain inevitably falls into when it is overwhelmed by inescapable threat. The three core elements are magnification, rumination, and helplessness.
Let's explore how they manifest.
Magnification is the profound cognitive distortion that this current pain flare is overwhelmingly massive, it is the worst it has ever been, and it will inevitably consume and destroy the patient's entire future.
It's the thought, if my back hurts this much at 40, I will be in a wheelchair by 45, my spouse will leave me, and I will die alone in agony. It escalates the current sensation into an apocalyptic future.
Exactly. Then comes rumination. This is the inability to disengage from the sensation of pain. The pain becomes the only channel playing on the television of your mind. You cannot distract yourself. You cannot focus on a movie, a conversation, or the taste of your food. You are hyper-fixated on analyzing every single throb and ache, just waiting for it to get worse.
You were just sitting in the living room, staring directly at the screaming fire alarm, unable to look away.
And the final, most dangerous element is helplessness. This is the profound, crushing belief that absolutely nothing you do, no medication, no physical therapy, no behavioral change will ever alter the situation. You perceive yourself as a completely passive victim to the biology.
And when those three fuse together,
When magnification, rumination, and helplessness fuse together, catastrophizing pours high-octane gasoline on the nociplastic fire. It maximizes the inflammatory stress response.
so the physical disease is the hardware, but the catastrophizing and depression are the software running a virus that overheats the system. You can't just unplug the stereo. The chronic pain condition exists. But if we treat the mental health side, we can turn the volume knob down to a level where the patient can actually function.
That is the whole goal of integrated treatment. But before we discuss what works, we have to address a very dark systemic danger regarding this mental health overlap. The literature refers to it as diagnostic overshadowing.
This is the part of the research that legitimately made my blood boil. Diagnostic overshadowing is when a doctor looks at a patient's chart, sees a psychiatric diagnosis like anxiety, bipolar, or depression, and uses that label as an excuse to completely stop investigating the physical causes of the patient's pain.
It represents a massive systemic failure in the medical triage process because the statistics show such a high overlap, lazy, or overburdened medical systems use the mental illness as a blanket explanation.
Give us an example of how this plays out.
A patient comes into the ER complaining of severe acute abdominal agony. The attending physician glances at the chart, sees a history of severe anxiety and panic attacks, and immediately concludes, well, your nerves are just acting up. It's a physical manifestation of your anxiety.
They don't order the ultrasound, they don't run the blood panels, they dismiss the patient with a sedative. And 6 months later, that patient is diagnosed with stage 4 ovarian cancer that was completely missed because their legitimate physical pain was overshadowed by their psychiatric label.
It happens far too often, and the data on schizophrenia, highlighted in the Umbrella Review, provides a chilling, tragic example of this phenomenon in reverse.
Walk us through that, because it highlights how deeply misunderstood these neurobiological systems are.
Individuals living with schizophrenia actually exhibit significantly elevated pain thresholds and pain tolerance compared to the general population. The severe neurochemical alterations of schizophrenia, particularly involving dopamine dysregulation, actually mute or alter the conscious perception of physical pain. Their body is being damaged, but the alarm bell is muffled.
So they don't feel the pain in the standard way that a doctor expects to see.
Right. Combine their muted pain presentation with the devastating diagnostic overshadowing from physicians who attribute any somatic complaint to a delusion or hallucination, and the result is lethal. Truly. The data shows that patients with schizophrenia are frequently diagnosed with serious physical morbidities, like late-stage malignancies, ruptured appendixes, or severe cardiac events far later than the general population. Their physical disease was ignored because the system couldn't look past their mental illness.
It is a profound double standard. On one end of the spectrum, depression biologically amplifies your pain, and doctors dismiss you by saying it's just your depression. On the other end, schizophrenia mutes your pain, and doctors ignore the physical disease because they attribute any weird complaints to your psychosis.
It's a catch-22.
This is why treating chronic pain in a vacuum, completely separated from psychiatric care, is medical negligence. You cannot treat the hardware without understanding the software.
Which naturally leads us to evaluate what interventions the data proves actually work for these complex dual diagnosis patients. The European Psychiatry Review analyzed the efficacy of various treatments across these populations, and the findings are highly nuanced. Let's look at traditional cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
CBT is the gold standard that every doctor recommends. Go see a therapist, change your thoughts. But the data showed something surprising about its impact on the actual pain, right?
Yes. Traditional CBT showed only small, often clinically insignificant effects on actual pain severity, meaning doing talk therapy did not significantly turn down the raw physical sensation of the nerve firing. It didn't change the 8 out of 10 pain score to a 3 out of 10.
Which, frankly, validates the patient. We are just thinking the wrong thoughts. No amount of positive journaling is going to fix central sensitization.
However, the review found that body-based interventions, specifically practices like yoga, tai chi, and guided movement therapies, showed large, statistically significant effects on pain severity.
Why is that? Why does moving my body slowly in a yoga class do more for the raw pain score than talking to a psychologist?
It comes back to the gate control theory of pain and neuroplasticity. When you engage in deliberate, safe, controlled movement, you are flooding the nervous system with proprioceptive signals information about where your body is in space.
Okay, proprioception.
These heavy, soothing, mechanical signals travel up the spinal cord on thicker, faster nerve fibers, essentially closing the gate and blocking the slower, thinner pain signals from reaching the brain. More importantly, you are proving to the hypervigilant parent in your brain that movement is safe. You are retraining the danger threshold.
And then there are mindfulness-based interventions, like mindfulness-based stress reduction, MBSR. The data on this is fascinating because it changes the goalposts of what success looks like.
The studies revealed that mindfulness interventions didn't necessarily lower the pain intensity at all. The nociceptive alarm was still ringing at a 7 out of 10, but it massively reduced a metric called pain interference.
Pain interference is the illness, is how much the pain stops you from living.
Exactly. The raw intensity of the pain remained, but the patient's relationship to that sensation fundamentally shifted. Through mindfulness, they learned to observe the physical sensation without triggering the catastrophizing cascade. They experienced the magnification, but they didn't attach the rumination and the helplessness to it.
The fire alarm was still screaming in the living room, but the patient learned how to put on noise-canceling headphones, sit on the couch, and read a book anyway.
They decoupled the suffering from the sensation.
But understanding how the brain and body trap you in this cycle of distress leads us to the most brutal physical manifestation of this cycle in daily life. Because when you are trapped in that cycle and you finally have a day where the alarm quiets down just a little bit, you become desperate.
You try to cram everything in.
Yes, you try to catch up on all the life, all the chores, all the joy you've been missing. Which brings us to the trap of the boom and bust.
The clinical literature refers to this as the overactivity cycle. It is perhaps the most common, deeply ingrained, and most physically destructive behavioral trap for anyone living with chronic pain.
Let's paint the picture for you, because if you have chronic pain, you know this cycle intimately. You wake up on a random Tuesday. By some absolute biological miracle, the pain is a 3 out of 10 instead of your usual 8. It's a good pain day.
A rare window.
And immediately, your brain goes into a frantic overdrive. You look around your house and think, I have to do the laundry, I have to paint the spare bedroom, I need to go to the grocery store, I have to weed the garden. You push yourself to the absolute physical limit. You paint the bedroom for 3 hours straight because the terror of not knowing when you'll feel this good again drives you forward.
That manic burst of activity is the boom, and the biological consequence is absolute and inevitable.
The bust. You wake up on Wednesday and your pain isn't just back to baseline, it has skyrocketed to a 10 out of 10. Your joints are swollen, your nerves are on fire, you have triggered a massive systemic flare-up. You are completely bedridden for Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, just desperately trying to recover from the damage you did on Tuesday.
And here is the harsh mathematical reality of the boom and bust cycle. When you average out the total productivity over that entire week, the patient has actually accomplished far less than if they had maintained a steady, moderated pace.
It's self-defeating.
It is. But the loss of productivity isn't the worst part. The true damage is neurological. By booming and busting, the patient has reinforced the brain's association that activity equals severe life-threatening danger. The hypervigilant parent in the brain says, see, I told you painting was dangerous. Next time, I'm triggering the pain alarm even earlier to stop you. You are actively worsening the central sensitization.
Okay, I have to step in here and challenge this logic.
Yeah.
I am pushing back on behalf of every listener's natural human instinct right now. If I am finally, miraculously having a good day, shouldn't I take advantage of it? Isn't it incredibly frustrating, almost maddening, to force yourself to stop a task when you actually feel fine for once? If I'm painting the room and my shoulder doesn't hurt, why on earth would I put the paintbrush down? It feels like giving up.
I understand the resistance. It is entirely counterintuitive. But you have to stop because in that scenario, you are making a pain-based decision, not a time-based decision. The absolute golden rule of effective chronic pain management, the foundation upon which all physical rehabilitation is built, is the strict transition from task-based pacing to time-based pacing.
Let's clearly define the difference.
Task-based pacing is how healthy, able-bodied people operate. You start folding the laundry, and you stop when the laundry basket is empty. The completion of the task dictates the duration of the activity. In the world of chronic pain, your pain levels should never dictate when you start or stop an activity, and the task itself should never dictate it. The clock must be the absolute boss.
Why can't I just wait until I feel the pain starting to ramp up and then stop?
Because of the delay in the nervous system's inflammatory cascade, if you wait until you consciously feel the pain increasing to stop the activity, you have already crossed the biological threshold.
It's too late.
It is too late. The neurochemicals have already been released, the glial cells are already pumping out cytokines, and you are already locked into a flare-up. Time-based pacing is about having the discipline to stop the activity long before the pain ever begins to increase.
The VA CBT manual provides a literal step-by-step formula for establishing this new baseline, which I love because it removes the emotional negotiation. Let's walk through a concrete scenario. Step 1. Estimate how long you can safely perform a regular activity on a bad day without causing a severe flare-up.
Okay, a bad day.
So let's take standing at the kitchen counter to fold laundry. If I know from bitter experience that after 5 minutes of standing, my lower back starts screaming and the numbness shoots down my leg, 5 minutes is my absolute maximum biological limit.
Correct. That is your baseline threshold. Step 2 is where the discipline comes in. Subtract exactly 1 minute from that limit. Your active goal is not to push to 5 minutes. Your active goal is exactly 4 minutes.
And step 3, approximate a mandatory set resting time. Let's say 3 minutes of sitting down with complete spinal support. So my rigid, non-negotiable cycle is 4 minutes of active folding, followed immediately by 3 minutes of resting.
And here is the reality of implementing this that patients find agonizing. You must stick to that rigid schedule regardless of how you feel in the moment.
Even on a bad day.
Even on a bad day, if you wake up and you are having a terrible pain day, you still try to accomplish your 4 minutes of folding. You don't retreat to bed completely because profound inactivity causes muscle atrophy, cardiovascular deconditioning, and ultimately worsens the nociplastic pain in the long run.
But I would argue the flip side is infinitely harder. Let's say I'm having a great pain day, the medicine is working, the sun is shining, I hit my 4-minute limit on the timer, I feel absolutely fantastic, and I look into the laundry basket, and there are literally only 3 t-shirts left. It would take me 30 seconds to finish the task. You are telling me I have to stop.
You must put the shirt down and go sit in the chair for 3 minutes?
That feels insane.
It feels insane. But those last 3 shirts are the trap. Those are the 3 shirts that trigger the invisible inflammatory cascade that leads to a 3-day bedbound bust. By rigidly, unapologetically adhering to time-based pacing, you are performing a psychological and biological intervention.
Reprogramming the brain.
Yes. You are proving to the hypervigilant parent in your brain that activity is safe, predictable, and totally controlled. You are removing the chaos and the unpredictability from your nervous system. Over weeks and months, that parent realizes they don't need to sound the alarm so early and your baseline naturally expands. 4 minutes becomes 6 minutes. 6 becomes 10.
It's the ultimate example of working smarter, not harder. You are systematically dismantling the danger signals. But the mental resistance to leaving those 3 shirts in the basket is immense. It triggers an avalanche of cognitive distortions.
The manual highlights a few common ones.
Oh, they are so common. The first is emotional reasoning. This is when a patient sits in the chair for their mandatory 3-minute rest, looks at the unfinished laundry, and the catastrophizing brain says, I feel entirely useless because a normal adult shouldn't have to stop after 4 minutes. Therefore, I am a useless burden to my family.
The second distortion is disqualifying the positive. The patient looks at the large stack of laundry they did successfully fold in those 4 minutes, but their brain completely discounts the achievement, thinking, so what if I folded some towels? I'm still broken, I'm still in pain, it doesn't matter, I might as well give up.
How do you fight that internal monologue? Because when you are isolated in your house, managing this invisible illness, those thoughts are incredibly loud and convincing.
You fight those cognitive distortions by anchoring yourself to a core mantra from the Cognitive Behavioral Therapy Manual. It is 5 words that every chronic pain patient needs to internalize. Hurt does not equal harm.
Let's repeat that for the listener because it is the linchpin of rehabilitation. Hurt does not equal harm.
When you have chronic nociplastic pain, the sensation of pain during gentle, paced movement does not mean you are tearing tissue. It does not mean you are snapping ligaments, grinding away cartilage, or permanently damaging your spine. The neurological alarm is ringing loudly, but there is no actual fire in the building.
Right.
Moving a sore, deconditioned body doesn't mean you are injuring it. In fact, gentle, time-based movement is the biological requirement for returning atrophied muscles to normal size, lubricating joints, and increasing physical endurance. You have to intellectually decouple the sensation of pain from the visceral fear of physical destruction.
Hurt does not equal harm. That is a powerful, liberating reframe. It takes the terror out of the sensation. But mastering this internal clock, retraining your own brain and body in the safety of your living room, is really only half the battle. Because eventually the 3-minute rest timer ends. You have to step outside your house, you have to interact with your employer, your spouse, your friends, and a society that expects you to operate like a fully charged, able-bodied machine.
And that transition is where the most profound friction occurs. Your family and your boss don't see the hypersensitized NMDA receptors. They don't hear the fire alarm ringing in your head. They just see you putting down a t-shirt after 4 minutes of folding, and, lacking context, they assume you are being lazy, unmotivated, or dramatic.
Which brings us to the core focus of today's deep dive, bridging the communication gap. We have to translate the complex biology of chronic pain management into actionable, unapologetic, boundary-setting communication. We are moving from the defensive posture of a biological victim to the solution-oriented advocacy of a project manager.
I love that framework.
Let's start with the workplace, because the financial anxiety tied to chronic illness is massive, and it directly fuels the pain cycle.
The occupational health literature draws a stark, crucial distinction between two concepts: absenteeism and presenteeism. Absenteeism is straightforward and visible. The employee calls in sick, misses work because of a severe pain flare, and stays home. Presenteeism, however, is much more insidious and far more common among chronic pain populations.
Presenteeism is the dark side of a strong work ethic. This is when you force yourself to commute to the office, you sit at your desk, the fire alarm is screaming in your head, your back is in agony, but you are utterly terrified of losing your health insurance or being seen as a problem employee.
Yeah, you just try to push through.
So you sit there, staring blankly at your monitor, trying to prove your commitment through physical attendance.
But the reality is, the employee is cognitively compromised. Their focus and efficiency absolutely plummet. They make costly errors, they take twice as long to complete basic tasks, and their presence actually becomes a liability. Studies show that presenteeism costs corporations vastly more money in lost productivity than absenteeism.
That's wild.
The UK government guidelines on a concept called good work are very clear that employers have a legal and ethical role in dismantling this dynamic. Good work isn't just about providing an ergonomic keyboard. It is about providing job security, task autonomy, and a supportive, flexible management structure.
The guidelines focus heavily on implementing reasonable adjustments. This means allowing flexible start and finish times so the patient can avoid the physical stress of rush hour commuting. It means introducing more frequent, mandated breaks to allow the employee to maintain their strict time-based pacing without fear of reprimand. It means condensed hours or allowing remote work. But the gap is, how does a terrified employee actually secure those adjustments?
The occupational health document introduces a fantastic operational concept: the mature conversation. It advises moving away from emotional pleading and instead initiating a structured dialogue with your employer to ramp down or adjust workloads based on factual constraints without ever seeking pity or over-explaining your medical chart.
As someone who has navigated this, the mindset shift is everything. It sounds like we need to completely abandon the instinct to act like a defendant on trial for our own body. When you are the defendant, you are constantly apologizing. You are bringing your MRI reports to HR like evidence in a courtroom, trying desperately to convince the jury and healthy people that you are really sick and deserve mercy. We need to stop acting like defendants and start acting like project managers.
Unpack the project manager analogy for me. How does that change the dialogue?
Think about a highly competent project manager overseeing the construction of a skyscraper. If the global supply chain breaks down and a shipment is delayed, the project manager doesn't go into a meeting with the investors, burst into tears, apologize profusely, and beg for forgiveness.
No, they don't.
They don't view the missing steel as a moral failure. They simply report the operating constraints. They look at the board and say, "Gentlemen, we only have 4 tons of steel available this month. Therefore, we can only build 4 bridges. Here is how we will prioritize the construction based on our current inventory." They state the facts unemotionally. If you have chronic pain, you are the project manager of your biological resources.
That is a phenomenal, empowering framework. It completely removes the guilt, the defensive posturing, and the vulnerability from the conversation.
You go to your boss and say, "These are my operating constraints. Due to a chronic neurological condition, I have exactly 4 hours of high cognitive focus available before my pain interference peaks and my efficiency drops. How should we allocate those 4 hours today for the maximum impact on the company's bottom line?" You are not asking for a free pass to do less work. You are asking to optimize your available resources for mutual benefit.
It is solution-oriented advocacy. You are taking control of the narrative and presenting yourself as a strategic asset who knows how to manage constraints rather than a liability who needs to be accommodated. But translating that corporate efficiency into personal relationships is often much harder. Your boss wants productivity, but your family wants you.
And communicating the reality of those operating constraints to a spouse or a child requires a different vocabulary. This is where the patient advocacy community utilizes the battery analogy, which is a variation of the famous spoon theory. It is the best way to explain the new baseline to someone who has never experienced systemic fatigue.
Explain the battery mechanics.
Healthy, able-bodied people wake up every morning, like a brand new smartphone that has been plugged into the wall all night. They wake up with 100% battery charge. They don't even think about energy expenditure. They can go to work, go to the gym, make dinner, and watch a movie, and they still have 20% left before bed.
Must be nice.
Right. If you live with chronic pain and central sensitization, your battery is permanently degraded. You wake up after a terrible night of sleep, and your battery is already at 30%. Furthermore, because your nervous system is constantly fighting the fire alarm, your background apps are draining the battery twice as fast.
The physical cost of basic existence is exponentially higher.
Exactly. Taking a shower costs 5% of your battery. Getting dressed costs another 5%. Commuting costs 10%. You have to budget that remaining 10% ruthlessly. You have to constantly ask yourself, do I have the battery power to attend my kid's soccer game today, knowing it will drain me to 0% and I won't be able to cook dinner?
And you have to communicate that battery level clearly and unapologetically to your family before you hit zero, which is where the exact language we use becomes critical. The trauma of chronic pain often strips patients of their confidence. The biological gaslighting we discussed earlier trains the patient to feel like a burden.
Right.
Consequently, they begin to use weak, apologetic negotiating language when trying to set a boundary. The communication guides we reviewed provide specific word-for-word script adjustments to correct this power imbalance.
Let's actually role-play these scripts.
Yeah.
Because hearing the difference out loud is wild.
Yeah.
It reveals how deeply ingrained the guilt is. Okay, here's the don't say version. Imagine I'm talking to my spouse, we are doing yard work together, and my pain is spiking. I say, I'm really sorry. I know we need to finish this, but I think I might need to stop soon. Maybe to sit down for a minute, if that's okay with you.
Analyzing that sentence from a behavioral standpoint, it is a disaster. It is entirely passive. You started with an apology, I'm really sorry, immediately centering your guilt. You minimized the biological necessity, I think I might need to stop, and you ended it with a question, if that's okay with you.
It sounds so weak.
As a listener, that phrasing invites debate. It sounds like a negotiation. It gives the healthy spouse the opportunity to say, can't you just push through for 5 more minutes so we can finish?
Right. By phrasing my severe biological limit as a polite request, I'm asking them to grant me permission to manage my own disease. So let's contrast that with the do-say version from the advocacy manual. Here's the project manager approach. My back is getting sore. I need to rest for 15 minutes.
The difference is night and day. It is clear, it is boundary setting, it is completely objective. You stated the biological data, my back is getting sore, and you stated the operational action you're taking, I need to rest. You are not asking for permission. You are simply informing your partner of the new reality.
Let's do another one because this happens constantly, especially during the holidays. Someone asks you to take on an extra project at work, or a family member asks you to help them move heavy furniture on a Saturday. Your battery is at 5%. You know you will suffer a massive bust if you do it. The don't say version is, yes, that's fine. I think I can manage that. I'll figure it out.
The do-say version is incredibly simple in its construction, but it is often the hardest sentence for a chronic pain patient to actually execute. The script is simply, no, I won't be able to do that.
Just a period at the end of the sentence. No elaborate excuse about your doctor's orders. No pulling out your medical records to prove your calendar is full. No trailing off into an apology. Just a firm, complete no.
It takes immense practice to tolerate the silence that follows that no. But fiercely protecting these boundaries is not just a psychological exercise, it is a vital medical necessity. Because while we must protect our physical energy, we also have to protect our social connections.
Which is hard when you're isolated.
It is, but the epidemiological data is unequivocal. A supportive, robust social network literally reduces resting blood pressure, lowers heart rate, decreases systemic stress hormones like cortisol, and increases the release of oxytocin, which naturally blunts pain signals.
But the tragedy is that the burden of chronic pain often forces patients into severe isolation. Not just because they lack the physical battery power to go to the restaurant, but because the social interactions themselves become emotionally exhausting. If every time you see your friends, they give you the pitying head tilt, lower their voice, and ask, how are you feeling today? Your entire identity becomes subsumed by your disease. You are no longer John the architect or Sarah the avid reader. You are just Sarah who has a bad back.
The advocacy guide addresses this loss of identity perfectly. It advises patients to explicitly and proactively take control of the narrative. You cannot expect healthy people to intuitively know how to interact with chronic illness. You have to train them.
How do we do that?
If you don't want your illness to be the focal point of the dinner party, you take the project manager approach with your friends. You look at them and say, I really appreciate you caring about my health, but I don't want to focus on my pain today. I want a break from it. Let's talk about our shared interests or the movie you just saw.
You literally hand them the instruction manual on how to be your friend without making the friendship a referendum on your disease. This proactive boundary-setting communication fundamentally transforms the patient's role in the world. You go from being a passive victim of your illness, constantly buffeted around by unpredictable pain, internal guilt, and the exhausting expectations of healthy people, to an active architect of your own quality of life.
You regain autonomy. And autonomy, neurologically speaking, is the direct antithesis of the helplessness we discussed earlier during catastrophizing. When you control your pacing schedule, when you confidently control your social boundaries, and when you optimize your operating constraints at work, you are sending powerful signals of safety to your nervous system. You prove to the brain that while the environment's difficult, you are in control of the response.
Let's step back and survey the massive territory we've covered in this deep dive. We started by validating the fundamental biology of the fire alarm. We established that chronic nociplastic pain is a very real, measurable, complex neurobiological disease characterized by central sensitization. It is a hypersensitized nervous system, not a character flaw or an imaginary symptom. Biological gaslighting is real, and validation is a literal anti-inflammatory.
We then explored how that physical hardware inevitably interacts with the software of the mind. We learned from the vast umbrella reviews that we cannot ignore the mental health volume knob. Treating depression, mitigating anxiety, and dismantling the psychological trap of catastrophizing are absolute clinical requirements for lowering the daily interference of the pain, even if the raw intensity remains. We also confronted the systemic danger of diagnostic overshadowing and the necessity of integrated care.
We tackled the incredibly frustrating behavioral trap of the boom and bust cycle. We learned the counterintuitive discipline of enforcing strict, rigid, time-based pacing, forcing ourselves to put down the laundry when we feel good, letting the clock be the ultimate boss, as the only proven behavioral method to slowly retrain the nervous system's danger threshold.
And finally, we discussed translating all of this biology and psychology into unapologetic, clear communication. We explored the necessity of establishing your operating constraints in the world, dismantling the anatomy of guilt, and shifting from the defensive posture of a biological victim to the solution-oriented advocacy of a project manager.
It is a massive, life-altering paradigm shift. But as we close this deep dive, I want to leave the listener with something to really chew on. We have covered the dense neurology, the psychiatric data, the behavioral pacing formulas, and the communication scripts. When we distill all of this down to its essence, what is the ultimate, most critical takeaway for the person listening to this right now?
I would offer this provocative thought to leave with you. We have spent decades, billions of dollars in pharmaceutical research, and immeasurable amounts of desperate hope looking for purely medical cures for chronic pain. The magic pill that will silence the nerves, the perfect surgical procedure that will fix the hardware. But what is the most immediate, most profoundly impactful relief available to you right now isn't found in a pill bottle or an operating room? What if the absolute fastest way to alleviate the sheer suffering of chronic pain is by completely changing the vocabulary you use to describe it? By shedding the guilt, unapologetically stating your operating constraints, and forcing society to adapt to your boundaries rather than continuously breaking your own body to fit their ableist expectations.
If the fire alarm is going to keep ringing in the background of our lives, we don't have to spend our precious limited battery power apologizing for the noise. We can put on our noise-canceling headphones, firmly set our boundaries, and only invite the people who believe us into the house. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.